The rest stop with no exit. It happened in early November of 2019, on a long, isolated stretch of Highway 212 in South Dakota. The air was freezing that night, fog rolling low over the road like smoke. I was hauling a load of construction materials from Rapid City to Sioux Falls, planning to drive through the night. Around midnight, after 10 hours behind the wheel, I saw the lights of a small rest stop through the fog, one I didn't remember from my previous routes. The sign just said, Pine Hollow Rest Area, Exit 17. I was exhausted and pulled in. The place looked old, a few vending machines under a flickering light, 2 parked trucks, and an empty sedan by the restroom building. I parked next to one of the trucks, shut off the engine, and sat in silence. Even the hum of the highway was gone. I remember the stillness being heavy, like the whole world was holding its breath. I got out to stretch my legs. The fog was thick enough that I couldn't see more than 30 feet ahead. The other trucks looked abandoned, windows dark, no sound of engines cooling. I went to the restroom, washed my face, and came back. My phone had no signal. When I checked the clock on my dashboard, it showed 12:07 a.m. I reclined the seat, set the alarm for 3 o'clock, and closed my eyes. When I woke up, something felt wrong. My cab window was fogged on the inside, and it was still pitch dark outside. The dashboard clock read 12:07. The same time. I thought I must have only dozed off for a minute. But then I saw that the fog outside hadn't moved, it looked exactly the same as before, frozen in place. I stepped out again. The air was dead still. No wind, no sound, no insects. Just silence. I looked at the trucks parked beside me, both were still there, in the exact same positions. But when I looked closer, the license plates were blank metal, no numbers, no letters. My breath fogged the air, and I suddenly felt the temperature drop even lower. I tried to walk toward the restrooms, but the moment I took a few steps away from my truck, it felt like the distance stretched. The building seemed to stay the same size, as if I wasn't getting any closer. My boots made no sound on the pavement. When I looked back, my truck seemed farther away too. Then the CB radio in the cab crackled to life. A burst of static, and then a voice. It was my own. "John," it said, "calm and slow, don't go too far." I froze. I ran back toward the truck, or tried to, but the fog shifted, like walls closing around me. The headlights flicked on by themselves, illuminating the lot. In that yellow beam, I saw the 2 trucks again. Their doors were now open. Both cabs were empty, but the seats were indented, as if someone had just been sitting there. My radio kept repeating my name. Sometimes a whisper, sometimes louder, distorted, like 2 versions of my voice overlapping. "You shouldn't have stopped here." I jumped into the cab and turned the key. The engine roared to life, but the fuel gauge was spinning wildly. I slammed the shifter into reverse, then drive, pressing the pedal down. The tires screeched, but the truck didn't move an inch. It was like the wheels were spinning in air. The fog outside began to glow faintly, a dim yellow-white, and shapes started to appear, silhouettes of people, standing at the edge of the light, motionless. They weren't moving closer, but there were more every time I blinked. One stood directly in front of my truck, maybe 10 feet away. I couldn't see its face, only that it was tall, wearing what looked like an old trucker's jacket. I honked. Nothing. The sound didn't even echo. Just vanished. Then the headlights flickered, and for a split second, I saw its face. It was mine. The same beard, the same eyes, but completely pale, lips blue. I screamed, slammed the gear again, and suddenly the truck lurched forward. I floored the gas, bursting through the fog. For a few seconds, the road appeared ahead, but when I looked in the mirrors, there was no rest stop behind me. Only an endless dark highway stretching both ways. The clock on the dash still said 12:07. My phone showed no service. I drove until dawn. When light finally appeared, I saw a green exit sign, Pine Hollow, closed. It was bent, covered in rust, half buried in weeds. The rest area didn't exist anymore. 3 days later, when I stopped at a truck diner near Sioux Falls, another driver overheard me talking about it. He told me there used to be a rest stop called Pine Hollow. It was shut down in 1993 after 3 truckers vanished there during a snowstorm. Their rigs were found with engines running, doors open, no footprints leading away. When I checked my dash cam footage that night, the recording stopped at exactly 12:07 a.m. Every single night since then, when I close my eyes in the cab, I still hear the radio crackle softly. And sometimes, if I listen close enough, I can hear my own voice whisper back. The end. The Hitchhiker in the Rain. It happened in late October of 2021, somewhere along Highway 50 in Nevada, the loneliest road in America. The kind of place where you can drive for an hour and not see another set of headlights. I was hauling a refrigerated load from Carson City to Ely, a route I'd taken a dozen times before. The sky that night was black and heavy, clouds low and swollen. Around 1:30 a.m., the rain started, thick, cold drops hitting the windshield so hard they sounded like gravel. After about an hour of driving through the storm, my wipers barely keeping up, I saw something on the shoulder ahead, a figure standing in the rain, arm raised. A hitchhiker. Normally, I would have driven past. But the storm was brutal, and he looked like he was freezing. I slowed down, pulled onto the shoulder, and rolled down the passenger window. The man was maybe in his 50s, wearing an old denim jacket, soaked through, his hair plastered to his forehead. He didn't say anything. He just looked at me and nodded once. I unlocked the door and told him to climb in. He hesitated for a second, then got inside, dripping water onto the floor mat. His face was pale, his lips slightly blue. "Rough night to be out walking," I said. He gave a faint smile but said nothing. The smell of wet clothes filled the cab. I noticed he wasn't wearing gloves, his hands were trembling and raw from the cold. I offered him a towel I kept behind the seat, but he just stared straight ahead. "Where you headed?" I asked. "Just down the road," he said quietly. His voice was low and flat, almost like he was reciting the words rather than speaking them. "There's a turnoff, right after the old bridge." I didn't know of any bridge on that stretch, but I figured maybe he lived nearby. The rain intensified, hammering against the windshield. The road was nearly invisible, only the thin yellow lines guiding me forward. After a few miles, the hitchhiker spoke again. "You drive this road often?" "Yeah, a few times a month," I said. "Not much out here though." He nodded slowly. "Not anymore." Something in the way he said it made my skin crawl. I glanced over at him. He was still facing forward, water dripping from his jacket onto the seat, but his expression hadn't changed. Blank. "Where'd you say you were headed again?" I asked. He looked at me then, really looked. His eyes were pale gray, almost cloudy. "The bridge," he said. "It's where it happened." "What happened?" He didn't answer. A minute later, through the downpour, I saw it, a narrow wooden bridge up ahead, the kind that looked too old for modern traffic. I slowed down instinctively. My headlights illuminated the slick planks and the sign beside it that read, "Dead Man's Creek, Bridge Closed." I turned to tell him we couldn't cross, but the passenger seat was empty. The door was still shut. The seat was soaked, water pooling in the fabric. I pulled over, slammed the brakes, and flicked on the interior light. He was gone. For a moment, I just sat there, heart pounding, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. I hadn't stopped, hadn't heard the door open, and yet the man was gone. I got out, the rain instantly soaking me, and looked around with my flashlight. There were no footprints in the mud. Nothing but the hiss of rain and the groan of the wind through the bridge's beams. Then, faintly, under the noise of the storm, I heard something. A voice. A man's voice, echoing from beneath the bridge. It was saying my name. I shined the light toward the creek, but it was just dark water rushing under the planks. The sound came again, louder, "Alex." I stumbled back, climbed into the cab, and locked the doors. My hands were shaking as I started the engine. The dashboard clock read 2:13 a.m. The passenger seat was still dripping wet, puddles forming on the mat. I hit the gas and drove as fast as I could until I reached a truck stop 40 miles down the road. I parked under the floodlights, still catching my breath. When I looked over at the seat again, I noticed something that made my stomach twist, a faint handprint on the inside of the fogged window. 5 long fingers, pressed into the glass from the inside. I didn't sleep that night. When the storm cleared the next morning, I asked one of the older truckers at the diner if he knew about Dead Man's Creek Bridge. He went pale immediately. "That bridge was washed out years ago," he said. "A driver got stranded there during a flash flood. Tried to save a hitchhiker he'd picked up. Neither of them made it." I told him what I'd seen, about the man in the denim jacket. He just shook his head. "They say sometimes he's still out there," he said quietly. Trying to finish the ride. A week later, when I checked my dash cam footage, the interior camera showed something I can't explain. For about 20 minutes of the drive, there was a figure in the passenger seat. A blurred shape, too still to be alive, too clear to be a reflection. Then, right before the timestamp reached 2:13 a.m., it just vanished. I deleted the footage that same night. But every time it rains on the road, and the wipers move in rhythm, I catch myself glancing at that seat. Because sometimes, just for a second, I can still see water dripping down the leather, as if someone just climbed in again, waiting for me to take them back to the bridge. The end. CB Channel 19. It was February of 2020, somewhere between Amarillo, Texas, and Tucumcari, New Mexico. I was hauling a load of frozen produce eastbound on I-40, alone in the cab, the highway empty except for the occasional glow of distant taillights. The night was cold and dry, a low mist clinging to the asphalt. Around 2 a.m., I flipped on my CB radio out of habit. Channel 19, truckers chatter, static, the usual background noise that keeps you company when the world feels deserted. For almost an hour there was nothing but white noise. Then, suddenly, a voice cut through, clear, desperate. "Breaker, breaker, anybody copy? There's been a wreck, need help near mile marker 228, just past the old bridge." The tone made me freeze. It wasn't casual. It was frightened. I grabbed the mic. "Copy that, this is eastbound Freightliner, I'm about 10 miles out. You okay out there?" Static filled the air for a few seconds, then the same voice came back. "I'm trapped, my rig's down in the ditch, can't move my leg, please hurry." I felt a chill run through me. I checked my GPS, mile 228 was close. I radioed again, asked for his handle, but the reply came muffled, almost distorted. "Name's Jack, hurry before the water rises." Water? There hadn't been rain for weeks. I pressed the pedal down, headlights carving through the fog. My truck roared up the hill, the road ahead glowing silver under the moonlight. I passed mile 227, 1 mile to go. When I reached 228, I slowed. There was no sign of a crash, no skid marks, no flashing lights. Just an old bridge spanning a shallow ravine. The ditch below looked dry. I parked on the shoulder, grabbed my flashlight, and climbed out. The air was deathly still. "Jack!" I shouted. My voice echoed under the bridge. Nothing. I scanned the ditch, no debris, no tire tracks, just dirt and dry weeds. Then my radio crackled again, the handheld mic still in the cab. The same voice came through, closer this time. "You found me." I ran back to the truck and climbed inside. The radio light glowed faintly green. "Jack? I don't see your rig, man. Where are you exactly?" The reply came instantly, and it made my stomach twist. "Look in the water." I stared out the windshield. There was no water. Only dirt. The night was utterly silent, yet I could hear the faint dripping of liquid somewhere, like rain hitting metal. "I don't see any water," I said into the mic, trying to sound calm. A pause. Then the voice returned, quieter, almost whispering. "You're standing where I died." The line went dead. I sat there frozen, staring at the CB unit. The digital screen flickered, and for a split second, the reflection in it didn't look like me. It was another man, older, with a cut on his forehead. The image vanished as quickly as it appeared. I shut the radio off, but the static didn't stop. It kept hissing through the speakers even with the power switch off. Then, faintly, through that static, I heard breathing. Slow, shallow breaths, like someone right next to the mic. I unplugged the CB completely. The sound continued for another few seconds, then faded. I sat there until sunrise, engine idling, headlights cutting through the fog. When daylight came, I stepped out again. For the first time I noticed faint grooves in the dirt at the base of the ditch, tire tracks half buried in dust, leading toward a patch of cracked earth. In the middle of it was a rusted piece of chrome, bent and dull, with the faint outline of a number, 228. That afternoon I stopped at a diner outside Tucumcari. There were two older truckers eating at the counter, and I asked if they'd ever heard about a crash near that bridge. One of them looked up immediately. "Yeah," he said. "About 15 years back. Guy named Jack Delaney rolled his rig off that bridge in a flash flood. They never found him. Just as CB Mike washed up half a mile downstream." I told them what had happened, but they just stared, not sure whether to believe me. One of them said quietly, "You must have picked up a ghost frequency. Happens out here sometimes. The desert holds on to things." That night, parked at a rest area near Santa Rosa, I decided to check my dash cam footage. The inside mic had picked up every word of my side of the conversation, but on the playback, there was no other voice. Just mine. Talking into silence. Still, I couldn't shake the sound of that last message. "You're standing where I died." It replayed in my mind every time I turned on the radio. A week later, driving through Kansas, I flipped back to channel 19, half expecting static. But the first thing I heard was a single, faint breath. Then my own voice came through the speaker, recorded, delayed, distorted. "Breaker, breaker, anybody copy? There's been a wreck, need help near mile marker 228. I threw the mic onto the floor and turned the unit off for good. But even now, when the night is quiet and the hum of the road lulls me into that half-awake state, I swear I can still hear it whispering through the static, my own voice, calling for help from a place that doesn't exist anymore. The end. The motel behind the gas station. It happened in July of 2018, somewhere off Route 66, between Flagstaff and Winslow, Arizona. The sun had gone down hours earlier, and the desert air was thick with heat that never seemed to cool. I was hauling a load of furniture cross-country and had been driving for nearly 14 hours. My eyelids felt heavy, and the radio had long since turned into white noise. Around 11:40 p.m., I saw the faint glow of a gas station ahead, one of those old, half-forgotten stops that time left behind. I pulled in, grateful for any light. The sign above the building buzzed weakly, "Gas, snacks, rooms." To the right of the station, half hidden behind a row of dead trees, stood a single-story motel with a faded sign that read, "Desert Moon Inn." It looked like it hadn't seen guests in years, but I was too tired to care. I parked the rig, grabbed my duffel bag, and walked toward the office. Inside, the air was stale, smelling faintly of dust and gasoline. A bell above the counter jingled as I entered, but no one came out. After a moment, a door creaked open and an old man stepped through. His face was pale, eyes glassy, and his clothes hung loosely, like he'd been wearing the same shirt for days. "Need a room," I said. He nodded slowly, took a key from a wooden rack behind him, and slid it across the counter. "Room 7, he said, voice rough like sandpaper. "Cash only. $20. I handed him the cash and didn't bother asking for a receipt. The key tag was metal and cold to the touch. He didn't smile or say another word, just stared at me until I turned to leave. The walkway outside was dimly lit by a single buzzing bulb. The air was still and hot, the kind that pressed on your chest. Room 7 was at the far end of the building. The door opened with a slow groan, and a wave of stale air hit me. Inside, The room looked like it hadn't been touched since the 1980s, faded curtains, a broken TV, and a bedspread with cigarette burns. I locked the door, set my bag down, and collapsed on the bed. The hum of the air conditioner filled the silence. After a few minutes, I started drifting off. That's when I heard it, footsteps in the room above me. Slow, deliberate steps. But the motel was one story. I sat up, heart thudding. The sound continued, heel, toe, right above where I sat. I told myself it was the pipes or maybe wind hitting the roof. But then something scraped along the wall, a long, dragging sound, like metal against plaster. I turned off the light, suddenly wide awake. The sound stopped. Then, from outside the door, came a soft knock. 3 times. "Who's there?" I called out. Silence. Another knock. Harder this time. I grabbed the lamp and walked slowly to the peephole. The hallway was empty. Only the flickering light bulb swayed slightly, as if something had brushed past it. I opened the door an inch and looked out. Nothing but dry air and darkness. When I turned back, I froze. The TV was on. Static filled the screen, but faintly, through the noise, I heard a voice. It was a woman's voice, whispering something over and over. I moved closer to the screen. "Room 7, don't stay." I yanked the plug from the wall. The TV died instantly. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. Every few minutes, I heard the soft sound of breathing, not from outside, but from the corner of the room. Each time I turned toward it, there was nothing there. I sat in the chair by the door until the first hint of dawn turned the curtains gray. When I stepped outside, the lot looked different. My truck was covered in a thin layer of dust, even though I'd parked it only hours earlier. The gas station lights were off, and the store looked closed. I walked to the office, but the door was locked. I knocked, no answer. I peered through the window and saw only empty shelves and cobwebs. The counter was gone, and where the key rack had been, there was just a wall of peeling paint. I thought maybe the old man had left early, but something about the silence made my skin crawl. I hurried back to my truck and started the engine. As I pulled out, I glanced in the side mirror. The motel looked smaller somehow, like it was collapsing into itself. The sign flickered once, then went dark. 2 days later, while refueling in New Mexico, I mentioned the Desert Moon Inn to another trucker. He frowned and said, "You mean that place off Route 66? It burned down in the early 90s. Electrical fire. Killed everyone inside, including the owner. They never rebuilt it." I told him that couldn't be right, I'd stayed there just 2 nights ago. He shrugged. "You must have stopped somewhere else," he said, though his tone didn't sound convinced. That night, I checked the dash cam footage. Around 11:45 p.m., when I pulled off the highway, the camera showed the gas station, but where the motel should have been, there was only an empty lot. No building, no sign, just a patch of dirt and a few dead trees. The timestamp flickered for a second, then froze. For the next few weeks, I kept thinking about the key. I'd tossed it in the cup holder and forgotten about it. When I finally looked, the metal tag was rusted almost black, and the number engraved on it wasn't 7 anymore. It was just a deep scratch, as if something had tried to erase it. Now, whenever I drive that stretch of Route 66, I glance to the right where that turnoff used to be. There's nothing there. Just flat desert and silence. But once, late at night, I swear I saw a light flicker behind those dead trees, a small, yellow glow, like a vacancy sign coming back to life for a moment, waiting for the next tired driver to stop and check in. The end. The Frozen Woman on Highway 81. It happened in January of 2017, along Highway 81 between Fargo, North Dakota, and Watertown, South Dakota, a stretch of road that looks endless in winter, where snow drifts swallow the horizon and every mile feels the same. I'd been driving since dawn, hauling a refrigerated trailer of dairy products, when the temperature dropped to nearly -25 degrees Fahrenheit. The air outside was so cold it felt like glass might shatter from breathing on it. By the time darkness fell, the snow had stopped, but the fog rolled in thick and heavy. My headlights carved narrow tunnels through it. It was almost midnight, and I hadn't seen another vehicle for an hour. Then, in the beam of my lights, I saw her. A woman stood on the shoulder of the highway, barefoot, wearing only a thin white nightgown. Her hair hung in wet strands, frozen stiff at the ends. She wasn't waving or moving, just standing, facing the road, as if waiting for someone. I hit the brakes, the truck skidding slightly on the ice, and rolled to a stop about 20 feet past her. My first thought was that she'd escaped from an accident or a nearby farmhouse. I grabbed my flashlight, pulled on my coat, and stepped out into the freezing air. "Ma'am?" I called, my breath turning to frost instantly. She didn't answer. The beam of my flashlight caught her face, pale blue lips, eyes wide open but glassy, as if she wasn't really seeing me. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" I said again, taking a cautious step forward. The woman slowly turned her head toward me. Her skin looked almost translucent under the light. Then she whispered something, too faint to hear through the wind. "What?" I asked, leaning closer. She opened her mouth again. "He's still out here," she said softly. Before I could respond, the wind shifted, and the fog thickened around us. For a split second, she seemed to dissolve into it, her outline fading like smoke. I blinked and she was gone. The shoulder was empty, no footprints in the snow, no trace she'd ever been there. I stood there shivering, the silence pressing in. Then, faintly, I heard a sound behind me, a soft tapping. I turned around and froze. On the passenger side window of my truck, there was a clear handprint. A woman's hand. I climbed back into the cab, slammed the door, and locked it. The heater was blasting, but the air inside felt cold as ice. I stared at that handprint. It began to frost over from the inside, as though the glass itself was freezing. My radio crackled suddenly, just static at first, then a faint voice. "You saw her too," it said. I grabbed the mic. "Who is this?" Silence. Then the voice came again, quieter now. "Don't stop for her. Don't look in the mirror." I shut the radio off. The voice didn't sound human. It had that flat, hollow tone, like an echo coming from inside a tunnel. I started the engine and pulled back onto the highway. My hands were shaking. I kept my eyes on the road, trying to ignore the fog swirling like smoke ahead of me. But every few minutes, in the rearview mirror, I thought I saw movement, something pale flickering in the darkness behind the trailer. At one point, I swear I saw a reflection in the side mirror, standing right on the road behind the truck, watching me. I blinked, and she was gone. I drove until dawn, stopping only when I reached a truck stop near Watertown. My nerves were shot. I went inside to warm up and told the attendant what I'd seen. His face went pale. "You must have been near mile marker 162, he said. "A woman froze to death out there back in 1983. They say she escaped a car crash, her husband slid off the road and didn't make it. She went looking for help in the storm and never reached the highway." He paused, lowering his voice. "Drivers still see her sometimes. Always barefoot. Always on nights when the fog comes back." I didn't believe in ghosts, but that morning, when I went back to check my truck, my heart nearly stopped. The handprint on the passenger window was still there, only now, it was on the inside of the glass. The frost had spread from it in a pattern like veins, thin and branching, reaching toward the steering wheel. That night, while sleeping in the cab, I woke to the faint sound of tapping on the window again. Slow, deliberate. 3 times. I didn't move. I didn't look. When the sun rose, the frost was gone, and the window was clear. But etched faintly into the glass, as if carved by ice, were words that hadn't been there before. "He's still out here." I sold that truck 6 months later. The new owner called me once, asking if I'd ever had trouble with the defroster. He said the passenger window froze solid every time he drove through Dakota in winter, even when the rest of the cab stayed warm. I told him it must have been a wiring issue. but I still wake up some nights hearing that tapping sound, and when I do, I don't open my eyes. The end. The Rest Area Radio. It happened in November of 2020, on Interstate 90 outside of Billings, Montana. I was hauling a load of dry goods from Seattle to Minneapolis, and the weather had turned ugly fast, freezing rain that came out of nowhere, wind howling across the plains. By 9 p.m., I'd been driving nearly 12 hours and decided to stop at a rest area just past exit 451. It was one of those small pull-offs with a few picnic tables, a vending machine, and a row of dim yellow streetlights. I parked the rig, turned off the engine, and sat listening to the rain tapping the windshield. The sound was steady, hypnotic. My radio, an old CB unit I'd had for years, was still on channel 19, crackling faintly. I left it running out of habit. Sometimes it felt like company. A few minutes later, as I leaned back in my seat, a faint voice came through the static. Soft, almost whispering. "Can you hear me?" I sat up straight, grabbed the mic. "Yeah, who's this?" No answer. Just static. Then, after a pause, the voice again. "Don't leave the truck." The words were so clear I thought someone was outside. I looked through the windshield, nothing but mist and wet pavement. I tried the mic again. "Who is this?" The radio hissed, then went silent. I figured it was interference from the storm, but I couldn't shake the way the voice sounded. It wasn't mechanical, it sounded human. Calm. Female. Around 10:15, I shut off the cab light and tried to get some rest. The wind had died down, and the only noise was the rain. I must have dozed off, because the next thing I remember was waking to that same voice again, louder this time. "Wake up." The radio light glowed faint green in the dark. I sat up, heart pounding. "What do you want?" I asked, grabbing the mic again. Static. Then the voice, whispering right through the noise. "He's behind you." I spun around, the sleeper cab was empty. Nothing but my duffel and coat hanging on the hook. I turned back to the radio. The signal meter was bouncing, even though I hadn't transmitted anything. I switched channels, 14, 21, 9, but the voice followed me. "You shouldn't have stopped here." The words were almost kind, like someone warning me. I threw open the door and stepped outside, the cold rain hitting my face. The rest area was deserted. Only my truck sat under the flickering light. I walked to the vending machine, no other vehicles, no footprints in the mud. The quiet was unbearable. When I got back inside, the radio was still on. I unplugged it from the power port. The light died, but the voice didn't stop. "John," it whispered. My stomach dropped. No one knew my name. I hadn't spoken it over the mic all night. The sound filled the cab, not from the radio anymore, but from the speakers in the dash. Even though the engine was off. I grabbed my keys, turned the ignition, and the dashboard lights flickered violently. The fuel gauge dropped to empty, then rose again. The clock flashed random numbers. I slammed the shifter into gear and pressed the pedal down. The tires spun on the wet pavement before catching. As I pulled onto the interstate, the voice rose in pitch, almost like feedback, then stopped completely. The silence was deafening. I drove for 20 miles before pulling off again at a truck stop in Huntley. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely hold the coffee cup. Another driver sitting at the counter noticed and asked if I was all right. I told him I'd been hearing things on the CB. He gave me a strange look. "You stopped at that rest area by 451? He asked. I nodded. He set down his mug. "A driver died there last winter. Carbon monoxide leak while he was parked for the night. They say another trucker found him with the radio still on. He'd been talking for hours, but no one ever heard the other side of the conversation." I didn't say anything. I left the coffee half-finished and went back to my rig. The next day, out of curiosity, I checked the wiring on my radio. Everything looked fine, clean, no shorts, no corrosion. But when I reconnected the power line, the speaker came to life instantly, even though the switch was off. "Don't come back," the same voice whispered. I yanked the wires out and threw the radio into a dumpster behind the truck stop. For the rest of that trip, I drove in silence. A few weeks later, while cleaning out my glove box, I found a folded piece of paper wedged behind the manual. It wasn't mine. It looked old, the edges yellowed. In shaky handwriting were 3 words, "He's behind you." Now I drive with no CB, no background chatter. But some nights, when I pass that exit, my stereo crackles for a few seconds, a faint, female whisper slipping through the static, before fading back into the noise of the highway. The end. The tunnel that wasn't there. It happened in April of 2016, somewhere deep in the mountains of West Virginia, along a back route I'd taken to save time. I was hauling a small load of timber from Charleston to Roanoke. It was around 10 p.m., the roads were narrow and winding, barely lit except for my own headlights. My GPS kept losing signal every few minutes, and I hadn't seen another vehicle for nearly an hour. The air outside was heavy with fog, not unusual for that time of year, but thick enough that it looked like smoke. I remember thinking I should have pulled off earlier. Then, through the fog, I saw the faint glow of a tunnel entrance ahead. It wasn't on the map, but there was a sign, Hollow Creek Tunnel, clearance 13 feet 2 inches. I'd driven through a lot of old tunnels before, and this one didn't look different. Just concrete walls, black entrance, yellow lights faintly visible inside. I slowed to about 30 and rolled in. Immediately, the sound changed. The hum of the tires, the engine, even the rain, everything sounded muffled, like I was underwater. The tunnel stretched on longer than it should have. The yellow lights on the ceiling flickered as I passed, reflecting off the wet road. After a minute, I realized I hadn't seen the exit yet. I glanced at the odometer, I'd been inside nearly a mile. Then 2. Still no end. The tunnel began to curve slightly, but the walls didn't look right anymore. The concrete looked rougher, darker, almost like old rock instead of cement. Something in my chest tightened. I turned down the radio and rolled the window an inch. No echo, no air movement. Just a low, steady hum, mechanical, rhythmic, like machinery buried deep below. Then I noticed the lights on the ceiling ahead flickering faster, one by one going dark. The last few glowed dimly, barely lighting the road. I slowed down even more, leaning forward over the wheel. That's when I saw them. Figures. Standing along the tunnel walls, about every 10 feet apart. At first, I thought they were construction workers, men in old coveralls, faces shadowed under hard hats. But as I got closer, I realized they weren't moving. They were just standing there, facing the road, perfectly still. I rolled to a stop. My headlights caught one of them full on, and what I saw made my blood run cold. It wasn't a worker. The face was blank, no eyes, no mouth, no features at all. Just smooth, gray skin where the face should be. Then, all at once, every single head turned toward me. I slammed the gear into reverse, tires screeching on the slick concrete. The truck lurched backward, but the tunnel behind me was now completely dark. No entrance, no light, just endless black. The engine roared, and I pressed the pedal harder, but it felt like the truck wasn't moving. My headlights flickered, and in the brief flash of light, I saw something else, one of the figures standing directly beside my window, its featureless face inches from the glass. I couldn't breathe. The lights went out completely. For a few seconds, there was only the sound of my heartbeat. Then, faintly, from somewhere ahead, a whisper, hundreds of voices, murmuring at once, echoing through the tunnel walls. I caught fragments, but they weren't words I understood. Just sounds, layered and growing louder. I gripped the wheel and screamed as I hit the gas. The truck jerked forward, tires spinning, and suddenly, daylight. I burst out of the tunnel, the morning sun hitting my eyes so hard it blinded me. I slammed the brakes and came to a stop on an open mountain road. The clock on my dash read 7:42 a.m. I had no memory of the hours between. When I looked in the mirrors, there was no tunnel behind me. Just solid rock and trees. I sat there shaking, trying to process what happened. I checked my GPS, it showed I was 15 miles farther along than I should have been. The logbook said I'd been off the grid for over 6 hours. When I finally reached a diner outside Roanoke, I asked the locals about Hollow Creek Tunnel. The waitress gave me a puzzled look. "There hasn't been a tunnel on that road in decades," she said. "They dynamited it shut after a collapse back in the 60s. Killed an entire crew inside." I didn't believe her until one of the older men at the counter turned around and added, "They say sometimes truckers still drive through it. But it ain't there anymore." Not really. That night, when I checked the dashcam footage, the file was corrupted. The only frame that played showed the moment just before I exited, a single still image. My headlights illuminated the tunnel walls, and there were people standing along both sides. But in that frozen frame, I counted more of them than I'd seen before. Dozens. Maybe hundreds. The image flickered once, then disappeared. For weeks afterward, I couldn't drive through any tunnel without feeling sick. The hum, that low vibration in my ears, I still hear it sometimes. A few months later, another driver told me he'd taken that same shortcut and found nothing there. Just an overgrown road ending at a rock face. He laughed and said I'd imagined it. But sometimes, late at night, when I drive through mountain fog, I see faint lights ahead, yellow ones, in a line, and I can't tell if it's another tunnel or something else waiting to open again. The end. The girl in the gas station bathroom. It happened in September of 2019, somewhere off Highway 287 in Wyoming, a long, desolate stretch between Rawlins and Casper. I'd been driving all night, hauling a half-empty trailer of electronics. The sky was pitch black, no moon, no stars, just a constant whistle of whine through the vents. Around 3 a.m., I saw a flickering neon sign through the fog, open 24 hours, fuel and food. The gas station looked ancient, cracked asphalt, rusted pumps, one buzzing light over the roof. I pulled in, my headlights sweeping across the empty lot. The place looked deserted, but the door was unlocked. I stepped inside, the bell above the frame giving a dull metallic ring. The store smelled of dust and old motor oil. The shelves were mostly empty except for a few stale snacks. No one stood behind the counter. I called out, "Hello," but the only response was the hum of the fluorescent lights. I decided to use the restroom before heading back out. The hallway at the back of the store was narrow, the floor sticky under my boots. The bathroom door creaked as I pushed it open. Inside, one flickering light illuminated a cracked mirror and 2 stalls. The air was damp and cold. As I turned toward the sink, I heard it, a faint sound, like quiet sobbing, coming from one of the stalls. I froze. "You okay in there?" I asked. The crying stopped. Then a small voice answered, barely a whisper. "He's coming back." My skin prickled. It was a girl's voice, young, maybe 8 or 9. I hesitated. "Who's coming back?" No answer. I knelt and looked under the stall door. I could see small, bare feet standing on the dirty tile. They weren't moving. "Hey, are you hurt?" I said, reaching for the door. Before I could touch it, the light above me flickered violently, buzzing like a swarm of flies. When it steadied again, the feet were gone. The stall was empty. I stood up quickly, heart pounding. The air felt colder now, like a draft coming from nowhere. I pushed the stall door open, nothing inside but a cracked toilet and graffiti on the wall. I turned to leave, but something made me glance at the mirror. Behind me, for just a moment, I saw the reflection of a little girl standing in the corner of the room. Long dark hair, pale face, wearing what looked like a faded nightgown. Her head tilted slightly, eyes wide, unblinking. When I spun around, the corner was empty. I rushed out of the bathroom and down the hall. The store looked different now. The lights were dimmer, the shelves completely bare. The bell above the door rang again, but I hadn't moved. I shouted, "Is anyone here?" From behind the counter came a low creak, like a door opening. I stepped closer and saw an old doorway I hadn't noticed before, leading to a small back office. Inside, a single desk sat covered in papers and dust. On the wall hung a framed newspaper clipping. I wiped the glass clean and read the headline. Local gas station owner arrested after daughter found dead on premises. The date was from 1982. I felt something shift in the air, a sudden drop in temperature. The radio on the counter behind me crackled to life. Through the static came a faint child's voice. "He's coming back." I backed away slowly. Every light in the building began to flicker, buzzing louder and louder until the whole place went dark. For a moment, the only sound was the hum of the cooler behind me. Then I heard it, heavy footsteps echoing down the hall from the bathroom. I turned and saw a shadow stretching across the floor, growing longer as it approached. I bolted for the door, yanked it open, and stumbled into the cold night air. My truck's headlights were still on, cutting through the fog. I jumped inside and locked the doors. As I pulled away, I looked in the mirror. The gas station was dark again, no lights, no sign, just an empty lot. The structure looked abandoned, boarded up, like it hadn't been open for decades. I drove straight through until morning, stopping at a diner outside Casper. When I told another trucker what I'd seen, he looked uneasy. "That station," he said quietly. "It's been closed since the 80s. Guy killed himself after they found his little girl in the restroom. No one's used that property since." I thought he was messing with me, until he added, "You must have seen that light in the fog, some drivers do. But when they stop there, they say the girl still cries for help." That night, out of curiosity, I checked my dash cam footage. The video showed me pulling into the lot, headlights hitting the building, but the gas station wasn't there. Just an empty patch of dirt, scattered with debris. Then, at the very end of the clip, one frame flickered, a faint image of the bathroom mirror, with a small figure standing behind me, face blurred, hand pressed against the glass. I deleted the footage immediately. Still, sometimes when I fuel up late at night, I catch the faint sound of a child crying through the wind, and I swear I hear those same words again, soft, trembling, and far too close. "He's coming back." The end. The truck that followed me. It happened in March of 2022, on Interstate 70, somewhere between Denver, Colorado, and Topeka, Kansas. I was hauling steel beams eastbound, making good time, trying to get ahead of a snowstorm that was moving across the plains. It was late, close to midnight, and the highway was almost empty, nothing but long stretches of flat black road and the hum of tires against asphalt. About 30 miles past Limon, I saw headlights appear in my mirrors, two small white dots, far in the distance. At first, I didn't think much of it. But after 10 minutes, the lights were still there. No matter how fast or slow I drove, they stayed the same distance behind me. Another 10 minutes passed. The lights hadn't changed position once. No lane change, no flicker of high beams, just steady and perfectly aligned with my trailer. I started to feel uneasy. I switched my CB radio to channel 19 and asked if anyone else was eastbound. No response. I tried again, voice a little shakier this time. Still nothing but static. When I passed a mile marker, I noticed something strange. The reflection in my side mirror showed the headlights were slightly higher than mine. Whoever was behind me was driving a truck. A big one. I decided to slow down and pull onto the shoulder to let them pass. I turned on my hazards, eased onto the rumble strip, and stopped. The headlights behind me dimmed slightly, like the driver was slowing down too. I waited, expecting the truck to pass in the left lane. It didn't. The headlights just stayed there, about 50 feet back, idling in the dark. I grabbed my flashlight, stepped out of the cab, and waved my arm. "Go around!" I shouted into the night. The engine behind me rumbled softly, a low diesel growl, but the truck didn't move. I climbed back into the cab, locked the doors, and watched through the mirror. The headlights flickered once, then both went out. The highway was silent again. For a few seconds, I sat there frozen, staring into blackness. Then, from somewhere behind me, came a faint metallic sound, like chains dragging over asphalt. I started the engine, slammed it into gear, and pulled back onto the road. The tires spun against the shoulder before gripping. I pushed the pedal down hard. For the next 20 miles, I didn't look back. But when I finally did, my stomach turned. The headlights were back, same distance, same position. I told myself it was coincidence, another trucker playing around. But deep down, something felt wrong. No one followed that close for that long on an empty interstate. As I passed the exit for Colby, Kansas, I saw a sign for a rest area 2 miles ahead. I decided to pull in. The truck behind me followed. Every turn I made, it made too. When I entered the rest area, the lot was deserted. I parked under the only working light and turned off the engine. The other truck pulled in, stopping at the far end of the lot, its headlights still pointed directly at me. I sat in the cab for what felt like an hour, staring through the mirror. The lights didn't move, not even an inch. Eventually, I dozed off, exhaustion winning over fear. I woke up just before dawn. The lot was empty. No other trucks, no tire tracks in the frost. Only my rig. I got out and looked around. The spot where I thought the truck had been was untouched, no marks, no oil stains, no signs a vehicle had ever been there. I brushed it off and got back on the road. But around 9 a.m., when the sun was higher, I noticed something in the mirror that made my hands go cold. On the back of my trailer door, faintly visible through the layer of dust, were 2 perfect handprints, one on each door, as if someone had been holding onto it during the night. I pulled over to check, but the handprints weren't in dust anymore, they were frozen into the metal, like frost forming only where fingers had touched. That night, when I stopped at a truck stop near Salina, I told the attendant about what had happened. He looked uneasy. "You ever heard about the ghost convoy?" he asked. I shook my head. He leaned in, lowering his voice. "Happened back in the late 90s. A driver fell asleep and jackknifed nearly moan. Another rig behind him tried to stop but hit him full speed. Both burned. They say sometimes you'll see one of the trucks still out there, trailing whoever passes the spot. It never passes you, never stops following until dawn." I laughed it off, but that night, parked under the lights, I couldn't sleep. Around 2 a.m., I turned over in my bunk and saw something through the curtain, 2 faint beams of light shining against the back wall of the lot. I stepped out with my flashlight. The lot was empty. When I turned to go back inside, I noticed something scratched into the dirt on the side of my trailer, letters written with a finger. "You stopped too soon." I wiped them away and left before sunrise. I never saw the lights again after that trip. But sometimes, when I drive that same stretch of I-70, I still glance in my mirror. And every once in a while, I see 2 faint white dots far behind me, steady, silent, and never getting closer. The end. The bridge over Dead Creek. It happened in late October of 2015, just outside a small town called Branson, Missouri. I was hauling a flatbed load of lumber from Little Rock to Kansas City. The air had that sharp autumn chill, and the fog was thick enough to swallow the road ahead. It was just after 2 a.m., the highway empty except for me and the hum of my own tires. I'd been driving for almost 10 hours straight when I saw the sign, Dead Creek Bridge, 1 mile. The name made me uneasy. I'd heard stories from other drivers about strange things along that stretch, accidents that never made the news, engines that died without reason. I told myself it was just folklore. The fog grew denser as I approached the bridge. My headlights barely cut through it. The concrete guardrails rose from the mist, slick with moisture. The moment my front tires hit the bridge, my headlights flickered, once, then again, and the dashboard lights dimmed. The engine coughed. I muttered under my breath and kept steady pressure on the gas. Halfway across, I felt a deep vibration through the steering wheel, like something heavy moving under the bridge. The temperature in the cab dropped. My breath fogged up the glass. Then I saw it, a flash of light below the bridge, reflected off the fog-covered water. It wasn't moonlight. It looked like headlights. I slowed down and leaned toward the side window. Through the mist, I could see it clearly, a truck, halfway submerged in the creek below. The cab lights glowed faintly under the surface, flickering like dying fireflies. I stopped the truck, set the brakes, and stepped out. The cold hit me immediately. I walked toward the edge and looked down. The truck in the water was the same model as mine, same color, same company logo, even the same license number. For a second, I couldn't breathe. Then, from below, I heard it, the sound of an idling engine. But the water was perfectly still. I stumbled back toward my truck, heart racing, when the CB radio crackled to life. "You shouldn't have stopped," a voice said. It was my voice. I froze, staring at the speaker. "Who is this?" I demanded. The reply came instantly. "Look down." Against my better judgment, I did. The truck below had changed. The cab light was brighter now, and I could see someone inside, a driver slumped forward over the wheel. He lifted his head slowly and looked straight up at me. It was my face. I ran back to my rig, climbed inside, and jammed the key into the ignition. The truck wouldn't start. The radio kept hissing, that same voice whispering through static. "You're next." I slammed my fist against the wheel, shouting. Then the engine roared back to life, headlights flaring. I didn't look back, just pressed the pedal to the floor and tore off the bridge. 10 miles down the road, I finally stopped at a gas station. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely swipe my card. The attendant, an older guy with a white beard, noticed my face and asked if I was all right. I told him what I'd seen, the submerged truck, the reflection, the voice. He stared at me for a long moment, then said quietly, "That bridge took a driver last year. They found his rig in the creek, same company colors, same number. He'd gone over during a fog storm. Folks say he still shows up to warn others not to stop." I didn't believe him, not until I went outside again. My truck was parked under a floodlight, and the front bumper was wet. Not just damp, dripping, as if I'd driven out of deep water. The rest of the night was a blur. I didn't sleep, just kept driving until sunrise. When I checked the truck's onboard camera later, the recording showed something impossible. At 2:17 a.m., the timestamp for when I stopped on the bridge, the footage froze. The image on the screen showed two trucks, mine on the bridge, and another below in the fog, perfectly aligned. For about 30 seconds, both engines appeared to idle, headlights flickering in sync. Then the lower one vanished completely. The last frame before the feed cut showed a figure standing on the side of the bridge. He was looking up at the camera. When I zoomed in, my heart stopped. The man was me. Same jacket, same cap, same expression, but his eyes were empty, pure white. I deleted the footage that same day. A month later, another driver from our company told me he'd crossed that same bridge one night and heard something strange through his radio, my voice. It kept saying the same phrase over and over, "Don't stop." Now, whenever I drive through fog, I turn my radio off completely. But every time I see headlights reflected in water, I still catch myself glancing too long, afraid that one day I'll see that same reflection again, my own face staring back, waiting for me to take his place. The end. The call from dispatch. It happened in May of 2021, somewhere along Interstate 10 between El Paso and Tucson. I was hauling machinery for a construction outfit, heading west toward California. The weather was clear, dry, and windless, the kind of night that makes you feel like you're the only person left on Earth. The road stretched endlessly ahead, black ribbon under a pale moon. It was just after 1 a.m. when my CB radio crackled to life. I hadn't used it much lately, most drivers rely on phones now, but I still kept it on for company. A familiar voice came through, "Breaker, breaker, this is dispatch." "You copy, Tom?" I froze. That voice belonged to our old night dispatcher, Jerry Nolan. But Jerry had died in 2018, heart attack at his desk. I'd been at his funeral. I picked up the mic slowly. "Who is this?" I said. The voice chuckled softly. "Don't play dumb, Tom. You're still running that westbound route, right? I've got a special drop for you tonight." My mouth went dry. The signal was faint but clear, not like interference or a recording. "Jerry?" I asked. He laughed again, the same low laugh I remembered from late shifts. "You sound spooked, kid. Don't be. You've done this run before. Just one last delivery, I'll send the coordinates." Before I could say anything, my GPS beeped. A new destination appeared on the screen, marked in red, drop point, 24 miles ahead. My hands were shaking. I hadn't touched the unit. It wasn't even connected to dispatch's system anymore. I switched the radio off, but the voice kept coming, now through the truck speakers. "Don't turn around, Tom. You're almost there." I pressed the brakes and pulled over onto the shoulder. The desert stretched out on both sides, flat, lifeless, silent. I stepped outside to breathe. The night air was warm, the only sound the faint buzz of power lines. When I looked back down the highway, I saw headlights in the distance, maybe half a mile away, approaching fast. I climbed back into the cab and started the engine. The headlights grew brighter, then slowed, matching my speed perfectly. I grabbed the mic again. "Whoever you are, stop messing around." No answer this time. Just static. Then, from the radio speaker, "You missed your last call, Tom." The voice was calm, steady, and close, as if the speaker were sitting right beside me. The lights behind me swerved slightly and disappeared for a second, like the truck had gone off the road. Then they came back, brighter, closer. My mirrors filled with white light. I pressed the pedal hard, pushing 70, then 80. The other vehicle kept up. The voice spoke again, almost a whisper now. "You don't have to run from me. You were supposed to make it home that night." I gripped the wheel tighter. My pulse was pounding. "What are you talking about?" I shouted. The answer came through the static, the crash. "Mile marker 312. My blood ran cold. That was the spot where, 3 years earlier, another driver from our company, my friend Mike, had died in a rollover. Jerry had been the one to dispatch him that night. I switched the radio off completely, but the voice didn't stop. It echoed faintly through the cab, coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. "You took his route, didn't you? You promised him you'd finish it." I remembered. Mike had called out sick that night, and I'd volunteered to cover his run. He never made it back from his next one. The headlights behind me suddenly vanished, swallowed by the dark. I looked ahead, and there it was. A small gravel road leading off the main highway, barely visible in the fog. My GPS was flashing red, arriving at destination. I slowed down, heart hammering. The turnoff led to an old industrial yard, overgrown with weeds and scattered debris. The kind of place no one's used in years. As I rolled to a stop, the radio flared to life one last time. "Thanks for making the delivery," the voice said. "You're home now." Then everything went black. I woke up hours later with sunlight streaming through the windshield. My truck was parked in the middle of the yard, engine off, fuel gauge empty. My phone said 9:12 a.m. I didn't remember stopping. I climbed out and looked around. The air smelled faintly of oil and rust. In the center of the yard was a rusted-out trailer with the logo of my company, the same logo we'd stopped using years ago. The paint was faded, but I could still read the name. When I walked closer, I noticed something scratched into the metal near the door. It said, "Dispatch, Jerry Nolan, 2018. Inside the trailer was nothing but dust and an old CB radio sitting on a desk. The mic cord was still coiled neatly. I hesitated, then picked it up. "Dispatch, this is Tom," I said, half joking, half afraid. For a moment, only static. Then, faintly, "Copy that, Tom. Good run tonight." The radio clicked off by itself. I left without looking back. Later that week, I checked with my company about the coordinates. They confirmed there hadn't been any active drop sites within 50 miles of that area in over a decade. I told one of the other dispatchers about the call. He went pale and said, "We still get those sometimes. The old CB line pings at night." Jerry's voice, giving routes to drivers who don't exist. I threw away my CB the same day. But sometimes, when I'm alone on a night run, the truck stereo clicks on for a few seconds. Static, then a familiar voice saying quietly, "Return completed. The end. The last mile." It happened in February of 2023, somewhere along Highway 191 in southern Utah, the stretch that cuts through the desert between Moab and Monument Valley. I was hauling a shipment of auto parts down to Flagstaff. It was a night run, quiet and uneventful, the road so empty that my own headlights seemed to be the only thing keeping the world real. The weather was clear, the stars sharp above the desert. Around midnight, I realized I hadn't seen another vehicle for almost an hour. The fuel gauge showed just under a quarter tank, so I decided to stop at the next town, fill up, and rest for a bit. My GPS said there was a station in 24 miles, Reston Junction. I'd never heard of it, but I'd been through that area dozens of times. The name didn't ring a bell. Still, I figured it must be new. The road signs looked worn but readable. The air felt strangely still, like the wind itself had stopped. Around 12:30, I saw a faint glow ahead, the unmistakable orange hue of sodium street lights. Then the sign appeared, "Welcome to Reston Junction, population 482. The town was small, a single main road with old-style lampposts and a row of buildings that looked like they hadn't been touched in decades, a diner, a service garage, a small motel, and, across from it, a gas station. The lights were on, the pumps humming. Relief washed over me. I pulled in, parked beside the first pump, and stepped out. The air smelled faintly of dust and gasoline. There was no attendant, but the lights inside the shop were bright. I went in. The bell above the door chimed, echoing too loudly. The place was spotless, no dust, no dirt, every shelf perfectly arranged. I saw no one. The register was open, a faint hum coming from somewhere behind the counter. "Hello?" I called. "Anyone here?" No answer. After a moment, I noticed the radio on the counter. It was an old model, big dials, metal casing, glowing orange tubes inside. The faint static from it shifted suddenly, and a man's voice came through. "You're late." I froze. "Who's this?" "Delivery's due. Last mile to go." I felt my stomach tighten. "You've got the wrong guy." The voice crackled. "You've been on this route too long, Tom. It's time." The lights flickered. The hum from the refrigerators stopped. The whole building went silent. Then, outside, my truck's engine started on its own. I ran to the door and saw the headlights blaze to life, shining directly into the shop windows. I stepped back as the horn blared once, long and hollow. The air smelled of burning rubber. When I looked at the clock on the wall, the hands were spinning backward. Something was wrong with the night itself. I bolted outside and climbed into the cab, slamming the door. The dash lights flickered, and every needle dropped to zero. The GPS screen was black, but faint words began to appear, letter by letter, "Welcome back." I threw the truck into gear and floored the gas. The tires screeched, the trailer rattled behind me. As I pulled out of the lot, I glanced in the mirrors. The gas station was gone. The entire town was gone. Behind me was only darkness, no lights, no road, no horizon. The highway had vanished. I was driving through nothing. I slowed down, terrified. The air outside the cab shimmered like heat waves, even though it was freezing. Then I saw something ahead, a faint shape in the distance, a figure standing in the middle of the road. I honked, but it didn't move. As I got closer, I realized it was a man. Or at least, it looked like one. He wore the same company jacket I was wearing. His face was pale, eyes open wide. When I passed him, he turned his head and followed me with his gaze, mouth moving silently. I didn't stop. For what felt like hours, I drove through that endless black nothing until finally, in the distance, I saw lights again, warm yellow ones, flickering like lanterns. I pressed the pedal harder, desperate to reach them. The lights belonged to a rest area. I pulled in fast, shaking, heart pounding. The sign read, Reston Junction, 10 miles ahead. I ran inside the restroom, splashed cold water on my face, and stared into the mirror. My reflection looked normal at first, until I noticed my eyes. They were bloodshot, with faint gray circles beneath them, like I hadn't slept in days. Then I saw it, movement behind me. Another version of me, standing in the reflection's background, watching silently. I spun around. No one was there. When I looked back, the mirror was cracked from top to bottom. I ran out, jumped into my truck, and drove until sunrise. When I finally stopped at a diner near Flagstaff, I told the waitress what happened. She frowned and said, Reston Junction? That place was wiped out in '92. Flash flood hit it overnight. Whole town disappeared, just foundations left now. I didn't believe her. Until she showed me an old newspaper clipping on her phone, the same sign I'd seen, Welcome to Reston Junction. Only this one was half buried in mud. That night, I checked the truck's onboard computer. The route log showed something impossible, a 10-hour gap between my last two checkpoints. The GPS coordinates during that time pointed to empty desert. No highway, no roads, nothing but sand. Since then, I've refused any night hauls through that area. But once, a month later, I woke up in the sleeper berth around 3 a.m. My truck was parked at a rest stop, engine idling. I don't remember stopping. The radio came alive for a few seconds, just enough for me to hear a single line whispered through static. The delivery's complete. Welcome home. When I checked my mirrors, the road behind me was completely dark, as if nothing existed past that last mile. The end.